Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO and to the Milo Bale Student Center. It is my privilege, because I've interviewed about every major position involved in city government over the past, well, lots of years. And it's my privilege to interview someone who is filling a new position. Joining us today is Tristan Bond. She's Omaha's new independent police auditor. I can't remember, however, someone taking on a new position that's embroiled in such controversy of whether it should even exist.
Right.
Welcome.
Right, thanks.
And welcome back to Omaha.
Thank you.
After living here in your late teens, going away then coming back for law school, and then going away.
Right. I haven't been back to Omaha to live for about 16 years, so I'm just back, and the city looks terrific.
It's changed a little.
Yes, it has.
And
yes.
We've changed things in what's happening in the police department, except
right.
you are not in the police department exactly. There's so many, I think, ambiguous things in people's minds about what you do or
right.
will do.
Right.
Let's start from the beginning. You were hired when?
I was actually hired the beginning of April.
Came on board about 2 months later.
Right, the beginning of June. So I was first in the office June 4th is when I actually began.
And you have the independent police auditor is so independent that she has her own location.
Right.
Sort of. I mean, you're not by yourself, but you're in a location that is not the police department.
Correct, correct. I'm up at the Blue Lion. It's at 24th and Lake. And it's not, the office wasn't housed downtown at City Hall nor at the police department. So yes, it is very independent in that regard.
And that's by design.
Yeah,
or didn't they have any room for you anywhere else?
Actually, as I understand, that was part of the issue too. We had to be in a city building, and they were running out of space downtown. I think the location is great for all the reasons I just said. So it's worked out well. There's easy access, good parking. So
before we get to sort of the controversial part. Being an independent police auditor, I think the people of Omaha, except for those who were really entwined in the issue of police community relations, and the city council people who this was their hot item, are just a little fuzzy about what that means. Does that mean that you're going to hear every complaint, that you're handling complaints now against the possible police officers, or the way things are handled within the department? Will we find out what happens? I mean, there's just there's more questions than we have answers for, but you seem to be having some answers.
Right. What governs the position is the ordinance, and that's what was adopted by City Council, of course. And really under the ordinance, there's kind of 4 major functions to the police auditor. And the first one is the monitoring and auditing of individual investigations. In other words, citizens' complaints against individual police officers. What the auditor will do in those cases will have the opportunity to sit in on any interviews that are conducted, follow any course of the investigation, ask for additional investigation if that's required, for instance. Another component of that function would be to audit investigations of citizen complaints, again, as they're completed.
But to clarify, the actual investigators are those involved in internal affairs.
Correct. The auditor doesn't do any independent investigating other than perhaps to ask for further investigation, for instance, as they monitor that. But the investigation will actually be done by the Internal Affairs Department.
So I think that's probably one of the major misunderstandings, is
right.
that you are an investigator and will make recommendations yourself on individual cases. Now, but you sort of can.
Right. There's a mechanism in the ordinance that allows the auditor or the assistant auditor, for instance, if they would like to see further questions asked in an interview or another witness contacted, for instance, that they can make that request of the investigators within the Internal Affairs Department. And if they comply, great. If for some reason there's a dispute about that, then there's also a component in the ordinance that allows that request to go up the chain of command until a determination is finally made, which could ultimately be made by the City Council. That's probably in the least likely scenario, but that is covered in the ordinance.
So people are still, as they have before, making their complaints about an incident, a specific officer, just a complaint about how, maybe someone, how they answer the phone or don't answer the phone at the police department.
Right.
They still have and will still make the official complaint goes to Internal Affairs.
Right.
I mean, sort of technically.
Right, and Internal Affairs does investigate citizen complaints. The formal complaint is the complaint then that actually is filed against a specific officer. One of the steps that the auditor's office will be able to provide is to initiate that complaint. The actual signing off on the complaint, which is still required, will be done in the in Internal Affairs.
What do you mean by signing off? Yes, we have received it, we acknowledge it, or we're witnessing it?
If you get the police department's complaint form, there's several instructions on there, which, by the way, you can obtain at a precinct library or you can download it off the website. That form then, if you filled it out and you're prepared to file your complaint, you may go to a precinct or you may come, for instance, to the auditor's office and say, I want to go forward on this. It's at that time that we can fill out a pending form and notify the Internal Affairs that you will be proceeding with your complaint. That's part of the function that we can serve. In addition, the auditor's office can assist anybody in completing that form. But the actual verification still occurs in the Internal Affairs Department.
So they would have to march that to a precinct office or to downtown?
Downtown, Internal Affairs. And typically that's set up by way of a telephone call from Internal Affairs to the complainant. Can you come down with your form? And also, generally at that time, the initial interview is also conducted. The verification is simply a signature that says, something to the effect of, I allege to the best of my knowledge that the foregoing are true and correct. So that's what activates the investigation.
All right. But you're helping that as sort of incidental to what you do. I mean, it's like we'll also help you fill that out, and we're glad to help you fill that out. But so you mentioned there's 4 main areas, and you just covered one, which is
right. That will be how the auditor's office really interjects on the individual investigations. But there's kind of 3 other functions as well. One is the statistical function, and under the ordinance, the auditor's office then is charged with keeping some sort of statistical database about citizen complaints. So as information and citizen context comes into the auditor's office, we will be tracking that, as well as being able to track some of the information about citizen complaints as they're processed through the Internal Affairs Department. That database then will be the basis for the 3rd function, which is a reporting function. And on a quarterly basis then, the auditor's office will be making reports that will be tendered to the auditing committee, which includes the mayor, the chief of police, and all of City Council. That report will reflect statistical trends, patterns, and make recommendations. And those types of recommendations and report kind of go to the overall systemic issues in a police department. And the 4th function, which is also, I think, a very important function, is actually to promote the public awareness of a citizen's right to file a complaint. And in that component, the auditor's office will be doing quite a bit of outreach, going to various organizations. Anybody who really invites anybody from our office, we will go to explain the process.
Once you get a few other things in place.
Actually, I've done that. I've gone to
speaking engagement. Well, you're doing that right now.
Exactly. So I think it's an important function that the office serves.
I saw a television news report, and the headline was, "This man is making use of the services of the new independent police auditor, but he will never find out if the officer he complained about was fired or something." I mean, that's headline writing. It's a little more. But the basis of the story is that the complainant, the person who makes the complaint, does not find out specifically if an officer is what discipline. But there are things but this is not changing anything.
Right. What changes is, and I'll explain that in a second. If an individual, if a citizen files a complaint against an individual or more than one individual police officer, that process hasn't changed much at all.
They would find out certain things at the close
That's
of
correct.
that investigation.
What will happen is the investigation will be conducted, and as I say, then the auditor's office will start to interface with that investigation to ensure that it was fair, objective, complete, and thorough. But the complainant would get findings that would be acquired through the process of that investigation that are finally determined by the chief of police. Those findings would be relayed to the complainant, and the possible findings would be sustained, meaning the allegations were proven, not sustained, which may mean that the situation may or may not have happened. They simply were not sustained in terms of a level of proof. Unfounded, meaning they were untrue, or exonerated, meaning that yes, everything that the complainant said happened, however, that did follow police procedure. On a sustained complaint, which would actually be a finding of misconduct, there may also be some denotation from the chief of police that a discipline occurred, but not the specific discipline. The results of that may then be appealed to the Citizens Review Board.
Which brings us to part of some of the new city council people. And we have 5 new city council people out of 7. Some of them campaigned on the whole issue of the Citizen Review Board.
Right.
Mayor Dobb, our past mayor, did not want it. The new mayor, Mayor Fahey, supported it when he came, but it's still, you know, whether or not they'll make a big issue of it and how soon remains to be seen. But some of them campaigned on it. I'm going to try to abolish this because we feel it's a duplication of effort, because we have internal affairs, which will still be there and will still be doing the same job it did, and we have a citizen review board that is sort of, if people aren't happy, they can go to them and they'll, you know, kind of go through the records again. So why do we really need you? Sorry.
The auditor model really serves a much more systemic purpose than an individual basis. Although the individual investigations, the auditor provides the assurance that they are conducted in this fair manner. So,
and that's where that's where independent is a real key to people that are concerned. That they individually, or they as a member of a group, maybe a minority, don't get fair shakes at the police department.
Correct. So it's very important that the auditor maintain that independence, and then one of those functions is to ensure, not being a part of the police department, that the investigation is conducted. And the words that are so important in the purpose of the ordinance are fair, thorough, complete, and objective. And so that interjects something very new in the process of the investigation. The most appeal boards don't have an opportunity to go and reinvestigate or have anything to do with the investigation. They can review a record. So that's
they've
a different
got a file,
function.
basically.
Correct. In addition, the auditor's office, I think, will perform, using all this information as part of the database, a very new and important function, and that's to make recommendations of how things can be improved. So while an individual may think, gosh, here's my complaint, and I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be, their complaint will also be counted towards the statistical database that may then be the basis of making any recommendations. So it's I think, very important that people participate and that their interaction with the process will really count, kind of in 2 ways.
Now, initial gut feeling, which are not always correct on my part, but as this was being debated and everything, I'm saying in my mind, I bet the rank and file isn't too crazy about this idea. They're very sensitive, and probably rightfully so, because they work very hard in very high-risk jobs about being second-guessed. What has been the reception by the internal affairs folks? I'm sure you've met with them, and you're trying to kind of, you know, make sure everybody knows who's doing what.
I can really say without hesitation that the chief has been, you know, just really terrific. So has everybody in the police department that I've met with so far. I've had unlimited access, really, and that's worked out very well. I go into internal affairs on a regular basis and am working closely with them to ensure that we have notification. We're still protecting people's confidences. So the police department's been terrific. I've also met with the union and various rank and file, and I've also met with the Brotherhood of Midwestern Guardians, as well as made some contacts with the Latino.
That's the black police officers.
Correct, and the
group.
Latino group as well, and I'm trying to also get into contact with the women's group. So I've met with lots of rank and file, and sure, there's a lot of uncertainty about what role the auditor will play. I'm trying to convey very much the idea, because I think it's critical, and it really is the heart of this ordinance, is that it's not designed to get individuals in trouble or point to wrongdoing. It's really designed to improve the overall system, and I think that's the importance.
And it's possible that the opposite of what some people fear could happen, which is if police fear that you're going to be second guessing in what questions you ask or recommendations for witnesses to be interviewed, that you're second guessing them. It's possible that because you are independent, if you're aggressively independent, I don't mean picking at them, but if you are very, very clear and seem to have good reasons for what you say and suggest, that the much maligned internal affairs departments of the world will actually become a little more credible to the outside world.
That's the key, really, in this model, is to improve the trust between the public and the police department. And one of the ways you accomplish that is by opening up and sharing information. And yes, this is how it's done. It's done on a systematic basis. If there are changes to be made, here are how the change is going to be impacted. But yes, it gives, I think, a great deal of assurance if everybody has a better understanding of how it actually works, and that there's input to suggest changes. So.
Just not the tired old internal affairs guys who sometimes don't even want to be in that job,
right.
Having to.
Right.
I mean, you get two stereotypes from crime shows. I love crime
right,
shows. Okay.
Right,
one is that
right.
The internal affairs officer is the guy that hates bad cops.
Right.
And he's there to just really protect the integrity of the badge. And then
Right.
there's those that don't want to be in there, and because they don't like to put their brothers or
Right.
sisters
Right.
in the rank and file,
Right.
on the hot seat.
Right.
And we get that.
Right.
Plus, it's complicated by past history of race concerns,
Right.
that they're not interested in a fair investigation.
Right.
They're just
Right.
trying to cover it up.
Right.
So all these stereotypes, myths, and many things promulgated by the media, which I continue to watch.
Right.
I mean, this could get rid of some of those kinds of stereotypes,
Well, sure.
assuming they aren't real.
Right, right, and if
they are,
then they will also have an opportunity to not only be exposed, but have an opportunity to change. My experience is police departments are very professional. They're run like any other large organization, and I think that has been very much the movement to modern policing. And so, if that can be revealed, great. If there are instances where you still have kind of the old model, if you will, of how police departments will work, then this will give this model gives it an opportunity to address some of those issues.
I think that you mentioned systemic, that you might have a chance to help them recognize some systemic things. A, because you're independent. B, because you are just sort of on the outside.
Right.
You have a law degree, which doesn't make you better or worse than a police officer.
Right.
I'm sure some people would say worse,
Right.
just because of what
Right.
they think about lawyers. But you just like police, have a questioning. I mean, that's part of your job. I mean, that's what
Right.
lawyers do. It's constant questioning. Does that work? Is that
Right.
right? Does it sound right?
Right.
This might work, but there are still people that believe that this is just redundant. And with budget considerations,
Right.
you can understand where your position can become more of a political pawn, just
Right.
because of the money.
Yeah, and of course the policy decisions are left up to the policymakers. I'm
not asking you to get in the middle of that.
No, I appreciate that, and it's important to stay independent. But the reality is, with this type of model, is that there can be some significant cost savings. For instance, if there's an issue that is revealed and can be corrected in advance of a liability, for instance, or even have some better information to allocate resources according to some of the statistical information. This is going to be a great opportunity for the public to communicate with the police department about what they like need, want, and maybe would rather see changed. So that information could be very valuable.
While people may still feel out of the loop in terms of, specific disciplinary action not being made public, unless of course it ultimately goes to the personnel board,
Correct.
because the officer is appealing
Correct.
the discipline.
Correct.
Though people may feel out of the loop, will your reports be public
Yeah.
of trends and things?
Right. The ordinance is silent to that. However, the reports are tendered to the city clerk for dissemination.
So
there seems to
probably
be
come under a
right. That's
public records.
Yes, I would imagine. And that's not to say that trends in discipline can't also be reported. They
Well,
just,
that's what I mean.
Right,
So if
but just not individual cases. So the confidences go to any individual, both police officer as well as complainant and witnesses. So that's who the confidences are designed to protect. But with the systemic database, then you can report, just basically numbers.
10 incidents of this kind of thing.
Resulting
This comes
in,
under this.
resulting in, their discipline was meted out in these categories, for instance, so that people will be able to see that discipline is imposed.
Okay, assuming that this is an independent operation, that the Internal Affairs Department is doing a decent job, I could see a situation where, and this may make people happy or not make people happy, that a lot of complaints come in, very few are sustained, say of a certain type.
Right.
The public then may think, well, no one's paying attention. We have this problem, this perceived problem with police-community relations. And I think that, kind of historical feeling,
Right.
perception.
Right.
But you might be able to say, this might be perception, or it may not.
Right.
And maybe that would open a new discussion.
Sure. For instance, if you were to get, and it's probably not uncommon in a lot of police departments that you have a lot of complaints about something like rudeness. And although they're difficult to sustain because you may not have a whole bunch of evidence of what rudeness is.
And my idea of rudeness is different than
Yeah,
yours.
that may be something that you can actually address, is how do you delineate what rudeness is, and that would impose sort of something a little bit more objective. But that's a possible recommendation. But those may not be claims that are going to be sustained with any great frequency, but other auditors and departments around the office then have taken the number of those complaints and said, well, let's try to deal with that on a more systemic basis. So it may not result in an individual case of misconduct or discipline, but it may go then to a wider sort of police department effort to address that issue, just as a matter of good business.
What if you find out, and I think this is good business, but we're dealing with people in service, a service entity as opposed to selling a product, but it's,
Right.
so it even becomes more important.
Right.
Plus you're dealing with health and safety issues,
Correct.
and that makes it more important. But what if you get a bazillion rudeness complaints?
Right.
And some are found, some are sustained, and the bulk aren't because you can't agree on what rudeness. Can you go, or would maybe you go into that file and say, I'm seeing a thread here of what maybe a certain part, maybe what the blacks think is rude. We might be dealing with a cultural thing, or Latinos think is rude, so that we can educate our officers.
It'll be interesting to see what the data does generate. I really don't have any idea.
But I mean, that's a possibility. It's not out of the realm of
right, depending on
this universe.
how you're looking at that information, and then, like I said, any kind of recommendation can be made, and then the recommendation would be tendered in the report, and then it would give the auditing committee, which includes the mayor and the chief of police as well as city council, an opportunity to review that. Those policy decisions would still be made by that group. All the auditor would be really doing then is reporting the information as it's been collected, which is really a very new function.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, but I want to cover a couple of things lickety-split. The ordinance calls for an assistant auditor.
Yes.
Where do we stand on that? Will there be one?
I hope so. There's a lot of work to be done.
I mean, the personnel board's been a little concerned about whether we should do that now, and
the position was approved, and it was just we were just about to get it posted, and then we've had the budget freeze. So that's kind of where that is. It's on hold. I hope it goes forward. I think it's important to have 2 people down there doing all of these tasks. So I hope that happens.
the other thing is it's hard to point to all the police auditors in the country and say they're all similar, because
Right.
there are different models.
Right.
So I mean, I can't look up on the internet all these police auditors and say, you should be doing that, or
Right.
and you should be doing this.
Right. Some cities have an ombudsman function, for instance, Boise and Minneapolis. The model that the Omaha closely resembles is the San Jose model, which Teresa Guerrero Daly was here and made a presentation. Her office has been in place for about 8 or 9 years. So that's probably the closest to the Omaha model.
What would you say of, and I know you haven't been here in a while, you haven't been involved in sort of the recent history of concerns about the police department or anything, but just what you're hearing so far, which is real limited, I know, and what you've been doing so far, your reading of the ordinance, what do you feel is Omaha's biggest expectation of you?
Well, interestingly enough, so far there's, I think, a lot of uncertainty about how this is going to go forward. And so I hope that I can fill this expectation, and that's to educate. It's not an advocacy position. It is really an independent position, but I'm not sure people are aware of how much of a systemic function it serves, which I think is really one of the most critical.
Make sure that the police department is the system of the police department, not just the people in it, but the system works for everybody.
Absolutely,
well.
Absolutely. And in many ways, that's kind of a softer, but it really sort of impacts many, many more issues.
Hey, when I can't get somebody to answer the phone, that affects,
Sure.
and, you know, and I live in a high crime area.
Sure.
And it's not, you know, nobody's being murdered.
Right,
But, you know,
right.
I mean, that affects
Right.
what I think about the police department.
Sure. And if the information can be conveyed to the police department to alleviate some of those concerns,
If they're calling
terrific.
me back,
Exactly.
too.
Terrific. You know, then, I mean, everyone's going to get much of what they want.
Do you have a criminal law background? Have you been involved with police or defendants or, I mean, anything like that?
Yeah, I had been a prosecutor for 7 years in Colorado Springs prior to coming here, and then was in a supervisory role, and one of my functions in that role was to act as a police liaison. So I did much of this kind of work as between a prosecution office and a police department as opposed to independently.
So you've had a bit of a baptism in this sort of thing.
Right.
Even though you're in new territory for you.
Yes, exactly.
What's the fire in your belly to apply for and really try to get this job? What was it?
Yeah, I think I share, as a lot of people involved in this kind of system, a real commitment to the overall access. Criminal justice systems are complicated. It's important that people have ready access to them, that they understand how they work, and that they activate the system by participating. And that's, I firmly believe in that.
And that it's perceived by people inside and out that their rights are always preserved.
Right, that it's fair and it treats everybody basically the same way.
And so that kind of turned you on about
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. It's what I love about the law, and it's definitely what I love in a position like this.
Maybe we should check back with you in 6 months after we find out if you're going to have a job for a while and see how you're doing and kind of what the feel is
That'd be
that you're
great.
getting.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd like
Tristan
that.
Bond, thank you very much, Omaha's new independent police auditor, for joining us. I want to say officer. Auditor and officer are very close. I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank you folks for joining us once again on Consider This. See you next week.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.